There we go. All right. I was wondering why it wasn't coming up. Sorry about that. I'm sending it right now.
Yeah, Michael, I just sent you an email with her copied on the message if you want to double check it.
Oh, perfect.
Good morning, Lauren. I see we still have a few coming in. I assume you may want to wait another few minutes. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to you whenever you want to get us kick started.
Yeah, let's give it another minute, Wes, and then we'll kick it off.
Wes, do you want me to go through the written version, or do you want me to start with the table sections?
I mean, typically we focus mostly on the table. If you want to briefly go over the sections beforehand, you can. I just wouldn't spend too much time because we've kind of already vetted those in previous. Absolutely. But yeah, feel free to go over it, and then I think the main focus will be on the recommendations.
Okay, perfect. And Tara, you received it, so you'll share starting on page 5, I believe.
Exactly.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
All right, well, I've got a little bit after 9, so good morning, everybody. We're kind of small but mighty this morning. Thank you for joining in on the task force meeting. I think I have 2 more topics. I'm not sure if this is the final 2, West. I think it may be. We're going to cover sediment and erosion, and we're going to cover climate change. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to I guess, Tara, you're kind of running the slides in the show there. When we're done, we may want to have a little bit of a discussion about how we continue to proceed to put together the draft report as we put all our compilation of sections together. So with that, Tara, I'll turn it over to you so we can get going.
Sure, I'll let Wes lead the discussion, but here I have posted the agenda. And Wes, if you just want to, I think Lauren pretty much briefed everybody on the agenda, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think Lauren pretty much covered it. So I think we'll go ahead and jump into item number 2 here, which is the overview of the sediment and erosion section. And I will confirm that these are the last 2 topics that we do need to cover and review. So we'll kind of talk about, after we go over these 2, kind of our next steps, next meeting dates and everything. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Michael, to go ahead and share your erosion and sedimentation section.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and appreciate having the opportunity to share the Department of Ag's perceptions with regards to sediment and erosion. This continues to be a critical component, as you can imagine, as we look at our nutrient loss reduction strategy efforts as well. So we see a nice overlap between the 2 initiatives. Just to kind of give a background, we went back to the original state water plan and kind of pulled from that. And then we sent this out to a variety of our industry partners, internal discussions. So this is kind of where we're at thus far, but we would welcome any and all opportunities to edit as we go forward. We do want to stress that we tried to also integrate, because the nutrient loss reduction strategies, at the time that their initial state water plan was created, there was no such thing as the soil nutrient loss reduction strategies, and also the climate smart resilient efforts that we kind of are getting kickstarted as well. So I know that's the follow-up discussion or the next presentation after us, but just to kind of keep that in mind. So, we believe that controlling sediment and erosion problems are critical to the effectiveness of the state water plan. And the objectives of this section is to recommend best management practices to reduce soil erosion and sedimentation across Illinois. So let's just kickstart with our initial recommendations and build upon those. We start out with our first recommendation to expand soil and water conservation program coordination. We believe that we need to reinvigorate the soil erosion and water quality advocacy, our advisory committee, and its two subcommittees, a state watershed priority committee and the education committee. So as you can see going across there, the lead agency with the Department of Ag. Funding, the local soil and water conservation districts are assisted by a state association water quality coordination and assisted funding through the IEPA contracts. Legislation, we would not need any. And then we believe that this really tackles much of the social justice, environmental justice, and climate change across the board. So in addition to that, to supplement that initial area is to review and revise the state soil erosion and water quality long-range plan that encourages all county, state, and federal agencies to align annual work plans consistent with the plan and provide a forum to discuss annual work plans. And we believe that Department of Ag would lead that up. No funding would necessitate that. Administrative rule changes in the Partners for Conservation rules may be needed along the way to address that. Do you want me, Wes, to stop at each section and ask for input, or just to keep going forward?
It may not hurt just after each recommendation just to see if there's any feedback or any thoughts from the group. It wouldn't need to pause too long, but just to allow anybody to chime in after each one would be great. Thanks.
Absolutely. So that the first two kind of sections belong together. I was wondering if there's any additional feedback or input on that.
This is Sarah. And in terms of funding, we do have some categories that that generally we've been using, and I'm not clear on the funding what exactly we need to ask for. Generally, we're asking if it's a one-time funding, annual funding, or I can't remember the other categories, or no funding. But in this case, you're indicating that there is some funding required, and I'm just not clear as to what that is.
Good point. So we kind of see this being somewhat associated with the Partners for Conservation. And at present, that is just on continued funding. And so we, hopefully for long term, there is a Senate bill right now before the Senate Ag Committee to look at nutrient loss funding. And so if that gets funded, then that would address that till 2035, I believe. So I think that's where the question, we do need to have confirmation of our Partners for Conservation funding, but I can go back and relook at that, Tara, and do a better job of addressing that one. Could you help guide me on some of that? Maybe I could have a conversation offline with you to kind of help me understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, Michael, there's just a template we sent out, and I can resend it to you just to kind of make these sections seem more cohesive. We kind of had some template answers to have in these categories, just so that it, again, kind of seems a little more consistent section to section. So I think Christine's also raising her hand, I see. Christine,
good morning.
Did you have...
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
we got you.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I'm at home. Technology is limited, but I think it's the operator. Anyway, good morning, Michael. I see that there's a reference to Illinois EPA contract funding. Is that in reference to the contracts that we have with a number of soil and water districts for the erosion and sediment control process?
Yes, ma'am.
Or is that different? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
I can't speak for certain, but I believe the agency is trying to increase our field office staff and take that responsibility back. So this is probably a conversation that we should be having with Sanjay to find out what the intention of the Illinois EPA FOS staff is, and if there is actually additional contracts in the future.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Chris. I can send this over to you, and if you have any input on that, then we could address that.
Okay, I will follow up on that. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So Michael, you talk about to reinvigorate. Can you give examples of when it was, I guess, vigorated in the past of the type of things that were accomplished?
Well, I apologize that I can't give exact history on that, but my understanding was originally maybe back in the T by 2000 years. There had been a little bit more engaged effort with the soil and water conservation districts, and it's sort of, the water quality advisory committees. I think it's kind of become lexic in over the past years. And Chris, maybe you could give some input on that. Do you have any historical perspective on that? This was one of those areas that was recommended to me to reinvigorate. So I can find out about that more detailed. I apologize, I don't know all the details on it. I just was told that they've not been as active of late, and they would like to see that brought back and maybe have a little bit more emphasis placed on the value of that advisory committee on a local level.
Yeah, thank you. That'd be great. I think that's probably something that would be good to have in hand when we do our final outreach.
Okay. Well, I'm making notes of that, and I will get those to clarify for you as well, Lauren. So, and I think one of the big challenges that we keep looking at is when we have different findings from our nutrient loss reduction strategy over this past the biennial report that was just put out. And one of the things that they talk about is there's a growing level of education that's taken place by many of our partners that have been really around the table. But there continues to be a question about awareness and information. And some of the studies found that 62% of the respondents didn't know about the nutrient loss and soil erosion issues. And we believe that we got to better measure that, and education is a vital part of that. So the education committee we thought was important because so many of our partners throughout the state and other parts of the industry are leading the way on that. So Farm Bureau to the new INREC, Extension, EPA, so a lot of our partners have been doing it, and IDOA needs to kind of reinvigorate that is what they were asking. But I can follow up on that, Lauren, in a little bit more detail. Any other on that first section? If not, we'll move on to point 2, which is basically expand public outreach and education related to soil erosion and sedimentation measures, particularly to the ag industry, urban revitalization efforts, and those that lead construction activities. This is broke down into 3 elements. We had short-term objectives, and the short-term objectives, the initial part was to educate industry decision makers, such as landowners, financial institutions, insurance providers, urban planners, agricultural producers, and industry partners. And that was brought up because in the state of Illinois, over 60% of the land that is farmed by our producers, of our 72,000 producers, over 62% of that land is owned by absentee owners or absentee farmers. And so we felt that there was a growing need to ensure that those that own the land need to be engaged in many of the activities and the discussions as well through education, because ultimately they will make the plans. Because if a producer doesn't carry the land contract to farm it, then why would they invest in some of the efforts if they don't know the future? So we thought it was important to ensure that all parts of the industry are engaged in that education. An additional part of that is invest in the expansion of Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources, which is the STAR program to assist farmer operators and landowners in evaluating their nutrient and soil loss management practices on individual fields. And what's nice about that particular initiative is it sort of uses much like maybe a Michelin star for a restaurant. It gives a star to the various farmers, and it becomes a sort of a badge of honor to have a star plaque hanging on your farm to say that you are practicing certain best management practices and implementing those to reduce your soil erosion. And so we felt it was vital to engage the STAR initiative in this capacity. A third level of that is to invest in the expansion of Urban Ag Manual program to help Illinois soil and water conservation districts in their efforts to assist planners, developers, engineers, and government officials in selecting soil erosion and sediment control standards and best management practices for their development project. And so this particular one comes from industry that they're saying we need to engage the Illinois Urban Manual a little bit and keep that at the forefront. Those are short-term objectives. We think there are intermediate objectives, and that would be to target education programs for elementary to higher education on the impact of soil erosion and sedimentation, and highlight best management practices to reduce human impact on soil erosion and sedimentation. One of the things we really tried to emphasize is that in an intermediate level, we believe that it's important to start thinking of the future generations and engaging them through our FFA programs, our community colleges and universities to help change and make sure that these particular elements at the forefront of all educational initiatives. In a way, we looked at it kind of similar to what GMOs did in the 80s. They really went after the youth. And now if you look at this premise, it's become pretty much a mainstay in the ag industry. And we believe that we need to engage more of our youth to talk about future, that soil erosion and environmental and climate smart issues aren't just today. They're going to be something that we need to shift the mindset. And so that's why we're looking at the importance of that intermediate of focusing at our young as well, our future coming generations. Our long-term objectives around this was to establish micro-credentialing and apprenticeship programs dedicated to soil and water conservation quality in partnership with academic institutions to revitalize and advance continued education that leads to an expanded human capacity needed to address the growing challenges. One of the things we continue to find, and I think all of us that work with our soil and water conservation districts, is we have a major capacity challenge. We are having, much like McDonald's or other industries and so forth, trying to find individuals that will pursue a career to support addressing soil and water conservation based issues, especially soil erosion and sedimentation. So we believe that it's in the best interest of the state to help advance some efforts, maybe working with the Illinois Community College Board to community colleges to talk about micro-credentialing options and or apprenticeship programs that will really change and shift the way that we plan for the future of our capacity needs. We can't implement these efforts if we don't have the staff, and many of our soil and water conservation districts are really having a challenge to find individuals that will pursue this as a career. And there are a variety of barriers, and we believe that these initiatives may help with that along the way. So any questions about point 2 and sort of the short-term, intermediate, or long-term thoughts? And I will stress that this is mostly around focusing on education and sort of addressing the industry needs to help educate everyone on the essential needs of soil erosion and sedimentation.
Hey, Michael, this is Wes, and I think you're doing a great job in explaining why these recommendations are needed and everything. But one thing that we typically try and have and the issues is kind of explaining that why. And even as I scroll up into pages like 2 and 3 of your report, it kind of readdresses, or it states the recommendations once again. But as I hear you explaining it, you're doing a great job of saying why we're doing it, but I think it'd be great to have some of that context in that issues section, either in the table here in the leftmost column, is kind of why we have that issues section, or even up in the, starting on page 2, where you kind of restate the recommendations in text format. I think the thought of how we configure this is that we kind of expand on the issues in the text and really kind of lay out why we need change, and then this table explains kind of what that recommendation is. So
okay. Sure, I can definitely
I think that
do that.
may give it a bit more better background on why we're having these recommendations. Just
okay.
And like I said, it's clear as day as you explain it, but I'm not seeing it specified in the text as much.
No, I can address that. I can definitely integrate that. Thank you for sharing that feedback. I guess when we were writing, I wasn't sure how much depth we wanted, but I will definitely go back and do that. I have no problem with being verbose.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have an issue of pulling out the recommendation text where you kind of restate the recommendations on pages 2, 3, and 4. But that's just my 2 cents. Thanks.
No, I appreciate that. I can go back and add that, and we can edit as we need. Okay. Anything else on section 2? If not, we'll move on to section 3.
This is Tara, sorry.
Yes,
For the funding for your long-term objectives, you say that it's self-funding federal grants. And the purpose of this particular study is to take to the General Assembly and get funding for state agencies and state programs, or to change legislation or rules. So I'm not sure. I think this is really important, but I wasn't sure if it's a federal type funding vehicle. I'm not sure if it applies to this particular task, but maybe Wes, Lauren, maybe I'm misunderstanding.
And again, that's probably my misunderstanding. When we thought about it, we were looking at how do we leverage state funds as much as possible with federal funds that are coming out. And so we were looking at what was realistic on where money will come from. But we can look at that, especially when we start talking about micro-credentialing, I guess, in apprenticeship programs. There may be a need for some additional funding with partners through the Community College Board, or how do we take and leverage our Partners for Conservation funds is what we were trying to figure out how we do.
Yeah, I think I'll see what Lauren's thoughts are on this, as he probably understands the funding ask to the legislature a little bit better. You know, do we have an additional category under funding that states federal or external, local? I'm not sure. So just interesting, I guess, aspect to consider.
Yeah, if we fuel in federal opportunities, that's probably key to note within the plan.
Okay. Yeah, and the reason is we just know that coming out of, or what we keep continuing to hear coming out of DC, will be that the next farm bill will start with a T, so trillions rather than billions. And we need to find a way to ensure that many of those dollars come back to Illinois. And because we don't have the capacity issues, many of those dollars then get passed on to our neighboring states, rather than coming into the state of Illinois. And so we wanted to articulate to our federal, or to our state legislators, that we also see the value in leveraging every single dollar that is produced in the state to match it, or to, increase that with some federal funds. And some of these efforts, federal funds would be a natural for them. So I guess I can address those as, if we believe we need to pull that, we'll pull that. I totally understand. Or if we need to shift it to say somehow these are the state funds that then would be matched for federal funds, I yield to all your guidance.
I think it's going to have momentum if it is matching federal funds, and so I think that, at least that's been my perspective of funding opportunities. So if that is in fact the case, I don't know if we need to designate that kind of differently on the various parts of the plan that do that. I think that probably matters.
Okay. And I can circle around with you too, Lauren, offline, and visit about how that we need to word that. I'm a big believer that we have significant amount of Partners for Conservation funds that have been invested in our conservation soil erosion efforts, and they're not being matched enough. We need to leverage those funds. And my big push has been saying that every single state dollar needs to be leveraged. And when we look at states like Iowa or Wisconsin, they're putting massive amounts of funds into these initiatives. And a lot of it is because they've learned how to leverage. And I think we need to do a better job at that. So I definitely, I can visit with you and figure out how we word that, or shift it in whatever direction you believe is the most vital.
Yeah, let's chat about that online after.
Okay, sounds good. I appreciate it. Anything else on point number 2? If not, I will shift to point number 3 there, Tara. And so that one, the overarching is increased expectations of all soil and water conservation districts to meet established soil erosion goals within local watersheds. Again, putting it back on the local level. In order to do that, we have several kind of sub points. And the first one is to complete a soil erosion and sedimentation survey in all counties by the year 2025, outlining the best management practices needed to reduce erosion and sedimentation loss at the local level. And one of the things we're really trying to push to think about The nutrient loss reduction strategy goals, for example, tend to look at it as an aggregate, the statewide level, and we are always going to be pressed and challenged to meet many of those goals, but we are making significant headway in many of the 97 soil and water conservation districts. So it's essential to also celebrate what's happening on the local level with regards to those best management practices. And so in order to do that, we need to make sure that our soil and water conservation districts have a clear picture of those efforts taking on locally. So that's what many of these efforts will look at. The second one is expand that critical staffing capacity needed to advance efforts that reduce soil erosion. On the local level, we just continue to have a challenge of meeting needs. Staffing needs. We can't bring federal funds in to put in some of the best management practices if we don't have staff to support our local producers in identifying and tracking and implementing those practices and the funds around it. So we believe that we've got to do some things to elevate that. And we do have the statewide Association for Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and they too are often challenged with identifying staffing to help implement this. And at the present time, we put so much emphasis back on the local boards to do all the hiring and recruiting and training, and it's just challenging for them. And so that's why we have such a diverse set of differences across those 97 districts. And what we're trying to say is that we need to help support that. We can't just think, if we say, well, we're going to give you money, you need to solve it. We need to identify some of the obstacles that they continue to face. And staffing and capacity is simply the linchpin in this entire process. So we address that as well. We believe also then to review and align the efficient and effective use of financial and technical resources by targeting resources into areas with the greatest resource concerns and needs. So looking at the state and identifying where those resources are. Currently, things are pretty much divvied up based on equality, giving all districts. And we think that there may be a need to look at where are some of the bigger hits and bigger needs on these issues, because the state is vastly different from the north and the south and the west and the east. And we need to identify what are the best management practices, staffing needs, and critical issues on a local level and on those watershed levels as well. And many of those watersheds cross over various districts, right? So we need to work together to help address that in a different way. We also talk about expand existing state cost share assistance for installation of conservation practices on land for which the valid complaint has been filed under the Partners for Conservation program or other federal initiatives, to just continue to ensure that our PFC funds are there to assist with cost share initiatives. Currently, we have the fall covers for spring savings initiative, and we've jumped that from 50,000 acres this year to 100,000 acres. And we just need to continue to see that expansion of those initiatives. Cover crops aren't the only solution, though. We also need to look at other things like no-till practices as well to reduce that soil erosion and sedimentation. And we need to support that reward of that initiative in some way. And we also need to find a path then that we reward individuals that have done this for years, because they're the ones that will continue to be the role models for other producers as we move forward. Need to evaluate and monitor marginal lands to ensure best management practices are advanced or land is put into less intensive land use practices. This continues to be a pressing issue in the sense that we see that with crop insurance and a variety of other support resources out there, that producers may be enticed to produce on those marginal lands. And we need to support people with making sure that marginal lands are evaluated and monitored to ensure that we reduce that soil erosion and sedimentation process. That gets into a little trickier one, because that means addressing land that may be taken out of production, and the ag industry doesn't necessarily want to see that. But how do we help maybe shift the way that that land is utilized? The next topic is expand efforts that share available information that show that erosion and sedimentation control practices in field can be used to greatly reduce the quantity of eroding soil on agricultural lands, and that edge of field practices can effectively reduce sedimentation transport. So looking and breaking it down, that we have both in-field practices as well as edge of field initiatives, and to make sure that those are being best educated and shared across our different districts. Moving on to G is establish performance-based producer-led watershed councils across the state to reduce phosphorus runoff, improve water quality, and enhance agricultural productivity. So in Wisconsin, they have these producer-led watershed councils, and they have been extremely successful at helping to engage producers. And one of the things that we find with these producer-led initiatives is that producer to producer can be more influential than if we had, the state agency or even soil and water conservation district experts out there. Producers can be some of the best advocates for addressing this and showcasing their success and how that impacts their overall land. And we believe that having some producer-led watershed councils across the state would be an effective way of engaging folks. So then that gets into H, which is a counterpart to that, to establish a state-funded producer-led watershed program grant that fosters innovation and shared learning among members to bring about continuous measurement improvements in such areas as water quality and soil health by exploring innovative on-farm conservation practices. And this is an area that we believe that there is a need for funding to establish these. Wisconsin has a wonderful model that they give out grants to local producers that develop these and to then implement them, and then they're supported with their soil and water conservation district experts. And so we believe this is a next step forward in helping to engage producers on a local level, and so that we can keep much of these efforts voluntary rather than mandated. The next issue is foster a revenue leveraging atmosphere that seeks to identify and secure federal funds that augment all state funds dedicated to soil erosion. So one of the things we talked about in this, Lauren, as you noted earlier, we may need to review how we implement this, but we have a significant amount of state funds that are being invested. And one of the things we believe is we need to ensure that that ability to leverage those with state funds is being looked at every single level and every single dollar, because that's how we're going to increase a lot of these efforts, is if we could bring in more of those federal dollars. And we know that the current administration's initiatives with their 30 by 30 and a variety of other America the Beautiful and you can go through the different activities and programs. We know that these sort of efforts around climate smart, conservation, soil erosion are going to be infused into the Farm Bill. And when that's exponentially increasing in value, we need to find a way to ensure that those dollars are brought to Illinois and not being lost to maybe other states that have that capacity already established. And then finally, expand funding through the IEPA Soil Erosion and Sedimentation Control Inspection Program, so more soil and water conservation districts can participate and provide technical assistance to the urban community through involvement in the Illinois Urban Manual, technical review and steering committee and review in the construction sites, and regular SESC inspections of construction sites. And again, this will vary, as Chris shared with me some of those initiatives today. So I'll need to circle back around with Chris on this to see how we implement that, if that's a viable option. Any questions on 3? I know I threw out quite a few things there, but really looking at our soil and water conservation districts and how do we elevate the use and provide the support for their capacity.
Well, Micah, you've continued to hit on some of the funding aspects of that, and I think, as I'm kind of thinking out loud, how does the State Water Plan Task Force better engage with, say, GOMB to make them aware? In my mind, in my experience, there's kind of a gap between what agency programs may need or how they could best leverage state resources for more dollars, and then what's in budgets being planned and going forward. And I feel like we always kind of are looking back and saying, oh gosh, if we could have made them aware more of this or that to leverage more dollars, we'd be in better shape. And so maybe as the task force, whether it's soil and water erosion or any of the other realms that we're dealing with, we need to find a way to better communicate on some of these efforts with GOMB, or using the state water plan as a vehicle to communicate with GOMB on future funding needs or how to optimize state dollars for leveraging, federal dollars and that sort of thing, in kind of an umbrella sense. And that then, if that's focused on Department of Ag or IEPA or DNR, then they can kind of come back in through the agency side of things as we discuss agency budgets. But you bring up a good point of how do we use the water plan and its implementation to try and drive future budget planning. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, Lauren, just to add to that is we see the state water plan as being a vital tool to help us, to justify why we need to leverage dollars and go after that. One of the challenges we do face in the Division of Natural Resources, at least in the Department of Ag, is over the years our staffing has been, I don't want to say cannibalized, but reduced. And maybe not expanded back to its original numbers. And I'm not sure how to implement that, because some of these initiatives that we're promoting will also then take Department of Ag staff to help ensure that. So even when you leverage with federal dollars, you need then Department of Ag staff to manage those grants and those funds that come into the state government. So that it's one thing over the other, but I think it's the federal government that has TA funds that then would help support the financing of those positions as well. So it's a chicken and the egg in a lot of ways, but I think we know that this state water plan can serve as a wonderful nest as we figure out which is the chicken and which is the egg.
Exactly. I mean, it's a tool that we can use, and so I'm thinking almost that once we have established or updated the plan, or as we're moving forward with it, do we use that as that tool or reasoning to give a briefing to GOMB on a regular basis, on an annual basis or regular basis, that helps them understand where we as a collective of agencies dealing with water want to head on some of these initiative and objectives defined in the plan, which then kind of opens that door perhaps for individual programmatic discussions in each of these fields.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe we as a task force need to give that some thought about how we use the plan to approach GOMB in their budget planning at the right time. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So any other comments on section 3? If not, I'll move on to 4. And again, Tara, I will go back and readdress with that funding piece. I just need some better guidance on that. I apologize for my oversight. So number 4 really kind of gets into an issue that we continue to see, and it's a tricky issue, but there are, of the 22 plus million acres of farmland across the state, there's no real strong picture about what is the statewide inventory of identified marginal lands. So we're proposing that we need to initiate a statewide inventory to specifically identify marginal lands currently in production that should be moved to less intensive land use because it contributes to soil erosion and sedimentation loading. We believe that just having that picture may help us to have a better, clearer insight as to what is marginal. How do we then work with the local soil and water conservation districts to identify other best management practices that could be utilized, or if need be, federal programs that could assist with moving those marginal lands out of production. So, but we need to have an inventory. We need to know what's really out there. And we do know that with climate change and with a variety of things that marginal land inventory would shuffle because some lands may become more marginal over time. But right now we don't have a true picture of that. And we believe that it's an essential component.
Mike, this is Laura Kiefer at the Water Survey.
Yes.
How is this different from, the inventory of highly erodible lands?
I don't know. That's a good question, Laura. That maybe we need to look at that. I guess my thought is highly erodible, but I don't know. That you bring up a good point, Laura. I need to think about that a little bit. Maybe I could visit with you to see about how that would differ or wouldn't differ.
Well, probably most likely I'd like to get you into contact with Michelle Bloomquist at IDNR, who's running the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program.
Okay.
Because a lot of that program contracts depends on the categorization of land and HELs are one of the primary things. But yes, let's talk offline and I can
Okay,
get you
perfect. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. Being new to my position and so forth, I'm still learning some of these crossover opportunities. And so I do appreciate you sharing that with me.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you. Moving on to point 5, we believe that we need to develop a new and refined existing incentives to encourage landowners and industry partners, such as our financial institutions, insurance companies, et cetera, to participate in the adoption of soil conservation practices. So much like what we're looking at is that many bankers or lending institutions, use that word, lending institutions pretty much now require, if a producer wants some sort of funding support from them, they must look at crop insurance as a necessity when it comes to making decisions. And we believe we need to engage our financial institutions and insurance companies because that are insuring land to say, you need to protect those assets. And so you need to help work with producers to incentivize initiatives that go into funding. So a lot of times, again, as we've talked about, a renter, what is their incentive to place, conservation practices or to place cover crops or no-till onto soil to preserve it when they don't know if they're going to have that contract for future years. And so a lot of time initiatives around soil erosion and sedimentation are long-term investments. And so we need to help provide support to the producers in ways that everybody in the team understand the importance of keeping that soil in the right place. And so we think that there is value to looking at how we promote and support financial institutions and insurance companies to encourage those incentives.
Michael, how do we as a state, as owner of land, do? Are we doing that?
It's not a clear-cut picture, I can put it that way. We tried to implement it, but I would agree that it maybe is not done as well as it should. And sometimes I think the one challenge, and I don't know that I would say this real loud and out to certain groups, but bottom line is financials tend to make a lot more decisions than maybe long-term. And sometimes we need to help to identify incentives to look long-term and not just at the initial bottom line. And that's a tough one because when you got to pay your bills, right? And that's the challenge that a lot of our producers and even state lands are challenged with. We got to still generate the revenue.
I just wonder if a recommendation would be, that if it's of importance to the state government that we encourage these practices, that we ought to practice what we preach. I mean, I think about just even our own lands within the Office of Water Resources that we might lease out for agricultural purposes, and my gut is we're farming to the fence. So maybe we need to recommend that the state, through some executive order or something, implement those kinds of practices as a demonstration and showing how it should be done.
Okay. I know that we're trying to implement that. We have 2 farms in the Division of Natural Resources that we have, the Zell Farm and the White Farm, and we really try to practice those efforts there. But I agree, statewide, I don't know if we do. We tend to look at how can we identify every possible dollar that we can bring in, right? And sometimes we're forced and we don't practice what we preach. So is there a way to do an assessment of that, Lauren? Is there something that we could recommend a review of state-owned lands and to ensure that they're practicing these best? Is that something?
Yeah, I would think that would be a recommendation that, each agency that deals with land ownership has, probably a realty section that can would be able to make those kinds of assessments at some fashion.
Okay, I wrote that down, and let me see what I can find out and implement that as well. All right. Any other comments on point 5, or if not, we'll move on to point 6. We're getting near the end here. Apologize. Encourage and support expanding research through the Illinois Nutrient Research and Education Council that outlines conservation economics and the advancement of best management practices that enhance nutrient utilization, increase crop production, and protect water quality. INREC has been a wonderful resource to elevate educational research initiatives across the state, and is funded by the industry. And so we believe we need to encourage and support the expansion of those initiatives to help look at address, and maybe like you talked about earlier, Lauren, maybe on even our state lands, what can we do to implement some of these and utilize state lands for these resources? If there's any other comments, I'll move on to point 7. Point 7, we state encourage and support expanded research through the Illinois Urban Manual Program to ensure the IUM stays up to date and maintains technical accuracy so that it can continue to be used as a tool for planning and maintaining standards and practices on construction sites, as well as the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination Systems permit compliance. This may be more aligned with IEPA as well, Chris. So there may be things that we need to revitalize based on some information you shared with me there. Point 8 was to advance funding.
Michael?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, you're doing such a great job. You have so many detailed recommendations, and this is not my area. But one thing, as you go back with your group to maybe revise these slightly, one thing that we've been carrying forward is that the recommendations have to have a measurable outcome. And so within 5 years or whenever we re-update the state water plan, we need to show that we were able to complete some of these activities. So keep that in the back of your mind when you're framing some of these recommendations. As an example, with this last one, when you say encourage and support, sometimes we might need a little more detail. Exactly what will we do to encourage and support? And I would also add in this one might be that you recommend that they update the urban manual every 5 years or bi-yearly or something concrete that could be at the end of the day, you can show that was completed. But I'll leave that for anyone else to add. But again, your recommendations are great. They just might need a little bit of fine tuning.
No, I appreciate that, Tara. Thank you so much. I wasn't sure how specific to be, and this helps me be able to do that. And I can definitely go back and address each of those, as you noted. Thank you. Anything else on point 7? If not, we'll move forward with point 8. This is a big introduction or inclusion that we believe is essential, especially since the last time the state water plan was developed, and to now the nutrient loss reduction strategy is now really a guiding factor for many of the soil erosion and sedimentation issues. So we believe that advanced funding to support the nutrient loss reduction strategy, working groups that guide state efforts to improve water quality across Illinois and downstream by reducing nitrogen and phosphorus levels in lakes, streams, and rivers. And I hear what you're saying, Tara, that we probably need to be a bit more specific with some measurable objectives on that. So, advanced funding over the next 5 years, we can look at that. There is a Senate bill currently being promoted around this, so I need to figure out how that implements into this as well. But we do believe that NLRS needs to be an integral part now that moving forward. It's kind of replaced the T/2000 and some of the other initiatives that predate the nutrient loss issues as well as soil erosion. We'll move on to number 9 if there's no other comment for 8. Number 9, so the Illinois Department of Ag has the Illinois Groundwater Monitoring Well Network. We currently are we've had it since 2020 in the Department of Ag, and we're currently doing a statewide assessment of that particular network to identify its value and its use and modifications and so forth over 20 plus years that have been have seen some wear and tear on that network. And so what we are looking at is expanding the Illinois nutrient loss, our Illinois Groundwater Monitoring Network program ran by the Illinois Department of Ag to focus energies and resources towards monitoring nutrient loss strategies that impact soil erosion and sedimentation, and support the statewide measurement programs for stream flow, water quality, and sedimentation for measures of the problem and progress. We think that this is a vital resource that is in need of modifications and to be able to address by increasing the value and the use of this particular network. And so that comes with a lab and some great resources that are just not been tapped and maybe utilized to its fullest extent. And so we would like to see that expanded. And again, I think it's yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Michael, does that tie into the IWIP program?
No, it doesn't. Well, it may have before, but it hasn't over the past 20 years. They've pretty much been focused mostly on pesticide. And so we're already monitoring more for pesticide contamination and so forth. And so what we're saying is it could be added to is nitrates and nitrogen. We used to measure nitrates and nitrogen until 2015. And then somewhere in 2015, someone made a decision because a piece of equipment died to stop doing that. And so it's kind of just reduced the value of this particular network. It's there, we do it, we have a staff, but we think it could be employed and expanded to be a better service across the board.
And I'm stepping out of my wheelhouse there a little bit, but I just wondered if that kind of collaboration with IWIP was appropriate in this instance.
Lauren, yeah, this is, Mike, again, this is Laura Kiefer at the Water Survey. The Water Survey has some of its own networks. And groundwater, as well as sediment erosion, and stream monitoring, things of that nature. So I think we need to talk offline about maybe finding where some things can be complementary or, enhancing each one. As we all know, standing alone these days isn't going to work.
Totally agree.
Yeah, so I know you haven't had a chance to really be able to reach out to too many of us on the committee. So yeah, maybe, if Chris and I could get together with you or somebody else from DNR and I'll go through these. But yeah, we have, some monitoring networks that can help in this for these recommendations.
That would be greatly appreciated, Laura. And again, I know that this network moved from your team over to our team like in 1999, 2000, somewhere in there. So somehow it used to be a collaborative effort and then it stopped being, and we believe that collaboration needs to be coordinated a bit more.
Yeah, I kind of remember when that happened, so we won't go into history.
Yeah. So we have a whole new team and we're excited about making sure it's revitalized. So wonderful. Well, I will reach out to you, Laura, on that as well. All right, and then number 10, our last 2 points here. Number 10 was continue to coordinate existing conservation and watershed programs and initiate a complementary conservation management program administered by IDOA to direct state and federal resources into projects which will help protect important water resources, control soil erosion and sedimentation on agricultural land, and monitor nutrient loss reduction strategies. This was expanding on a prior initiative under the initial state water plan. And we just, again, continue to say that IDOA should be really pushed in helping to elevate that coordination for conservation and watershed programs. And again, I think the key is, even what Laura said, collaboration, I think is vital to us. And we want to find ways to augment these collaborative relationships that maybe had been there, 20 plus years ago, and how do we revitalize those to bring them back? And then our final comment would be to expand the Illinois Department of Agriculture staffing capacity to support all initiatives outlined. Specifically fund the development of 4 additional Bureau of Land and Water Resource regional representatives. Currently, we used to have 5, and then it went down. We're currently serving the entire state with 2 individuals because, as you all probably understand, navigating CMS to hire replacements has been a daunting process. One of our positions left almost over a year ago now, and we have not had success at getting replaced. We have another one that left this past December. We're still navigating that. And we've had one that's been empty for many years, and we've just not been allowed to move forward. And some of that, I will not place blame on anybody but ourselves, that, over the years with budgets and fiscal, they've just not replaced those positions. And we believe that in order to implement many of these initiatives, the Department of Ag and the Bureau of Natural Resources, Land and Water Resources, needs to be back to its full capacity to support these initiatives. And then the final one would be to establish an IDOA, Division of Natural Resources Education position, similar like the DNR has, somebody that focuses on education specifically within our division. Right now, it's just sort of an add-on, and we need to elevate that to ensure that all this vital information and resources are disseminated accordingly to our target audiences across the board. Otherwise, education and communication are essential to all these implementation, and we believe we need to be at full capacity to be able to do that. And I'm not sure if that's appropriate in here or not, Lauren. I guess that would be the area where, we could use some guidance if need be.
For establishing positions, or?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I certainly, first of all, feel your pain. So you're not alone.
Yeah.
In my mind, a lot of our goals and a lot of our strategies and recommendations here do boil down to head count. So, maybe as we're developing the plan, maybe that's something we just, point out at the beginning as well, to say that, this plan includes some great recommendations, some great, programmatic improvements and so forth, but that has to be resourced at a staffing level.
Yeah. Because if you look across the board, IDOA is not by any means any different than many of our colleagues around the table today. We're all forced to do more with fewer people, and the challenge is if we're going to get to that level of that we need to around these state water water issues, we need to start elevating our staffing, and we've been cannibalized so much across the state that we need to address that. It needs to be a big push to allow for restaffing of those positions and or create contemporary positions that reflect the needs. Climate smart resilience and climate smart initiatives are going to call for a whole new group of people to advance these initiatives, and we just don't have that. And then also the challenge is getting some of our young people into the pipeline. How do we have retirements happening left and right across the state on all these issues, and it's so hard for us to get anybody back into those positions. And CMS needs to be engaged in how we can facilitate the fostering of relationships with future generation and creating a pipeline. And right now we aren't doing that.
Yeah, and again, I've called the state water plan kind of our Trojan horse, right? But to me, such a plan provides, I don't know, a neutral, not necessarily benign, but a neutral way to kind of introduce that concept as a collective, without necessarily whining or complaining about staffing problems in any one program.
Exactly.
It's a nice way to lift that up and put that in front of our elected officials and our target audience in a way to say, hey, this needs to be addressed.
So that is our element or section, and I appreciate all the feedback, and I will reach out to more for gain some additional insights. And again, as you review this, if there are any other linkages or collaborations or things that I don't have in here, your collective wisdom is so valuable to me as I continue to navigate this position as well as navigate this service to the team. So I turn it back over to you, Wes, and yield my time.
All right. Thank you, Mike. I guess I'll just pause, make sure there's no last minute comments as it pertains to anything sediment and erosion sections.
This is Tara, and I think that I'm maybe expanding on what Lauren said about this adding staffing. I think as a group, we need to decide. I like what Lauren said, maybe something in the beginning, but I feel like by asking for these at the last two is a little bit double counting, because in some of the previous recommendations, we specifically asked for funding for new staffing and personnel. So again, it's just something that in the long run, how we address this, or I think every section would want to add this. So we just need to think of how we want to approach it. Thanks.
Thanks, Tara. Yeah, definitely something we'll need to look into as we develop that, I guess, that paragraph or that text stating that additional support's needed for any of this to be accomplished. So that may cause for some revisions as we kind of do the fine-tuning of this plan. Are there any other comments before we shift gears? Okay, hearing none. Dave, are you with us? I see you in the participations list. You got audio. We'll switch it over to our climate change section.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate everyone's input. There are some areas where it was not very clear to me how to proceed. So in advance, I say I appreciate the kinds of suggestions that are coming up, and I also appreciate no one asking me how much snow we're going to get in the next few days. So what I'd like to do, if I could take the screen for a bit, we have an updated version of the document, which I did not share yet this morning, but it does reorganize a lot of these points. So perhaps if I could do the sharing and control the screen, that'd be all right?
Yeah, yes, I think you can just select share. Does that work, Wes?
Let me try it if that's okay. Okay. Can you see my screen? I'm scrolling back and forth here.
Yeah, right now we have two documents up.
Okay.
One, document 205 is on one screen, and we have the climate section on another. So that's what I'm saying is almost kind of a split screen view here is what we have.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure how I can address that, but
I've never seen that before either, Dave, so I'm intrigued how you did it. So, I mean, just know that we do have that document 205 up and we can see it. I'm not sure if it pertains to anything, but on the left side of my screen, I do see the climate change. So,
okay.
So I don't know if you can just maximize it or what's going on. So this is a new one for me.
Let's see what we can do here. Okay. Yes, that was done just to emphasize that this is collaborative. And never mind. Anyway, just to give you kind of a flavor, and I'm not going to go through the text part of this very much at all. But the beginning sections focus on the types of climate changes that are currently projected for Illinois. And pointing out that these that climate change, either directly or indirectly, is likely to affect virtually all aspects of the that are discussed in the State Water Plan. There are a few areas that we thought should be emphasized. So we have some discussion on agriculture and flash droughts and floods. Urban issues, which are going to be particularly important for parts of the state, and winter impacts, which are often not discussed in terms of water-related issues, but there are some points we wanted to emphasize here, and you'll see those in the recommendations. So shall I go ahead and focus on the recommendations rather than any of that text?
Yeah, that sounds good, Dave, if you just want to walk through those recommendations.
Okay, sure. Okay, so the first few recommendations in terms of issue, the recommendations are related to climate change in an overall sense. And you'll see later on here, we're going to be talking about more specific aspects of climate and how climate is expected to change. So the first issue is current research quality observations are taken at too few climate stations to determine trends and detect impending precipitation extremes. And so our recommendation is to increase both the quality and the number of climate monitoring sites in sensitive areas to detect precipitation extremes. And special emphasis is needed on regions of diverse agricultural practices, as well as growing suburban and urban areas. Okay, so if there are no comments, I'll go on to the next one.
Hey, Dave,
Yes.
this is Laura.
Hi, Laura.
For kind of try to get it more detailed, and I know I was watching the chatter of the group too, so so now I'm piping up now, sorry. Just, is there like a percent increase or a number or what type of stations that could add just a little bit more detail for somebody to sink their teeth into?
That's a great point. I think I'd like to discuss it with the group before answering that here, but that's a great point. So as for quality, it's a little hard to quantify that right here, but certainly the number of climate monitoring sites. Yeah, great point.
I just wanted to add, this is
Yeah.
Kara again, in terms of those other category or the other columns, I do understand this is tricky for this particular topic because you are looking at all of our needs. And so, you know, I open it up to the group that eventually these columns need to be filled in. And if so, this might be a case where there's several lead agencies. I'm not sure how to even begin to approach it here, but I'm just bringing it forward that it will be something we need to think about how we fill those categories in later. And again, if any of these are redundant on anything we've discussed in specific sections, you know, those cross-cutting issues will need to be addressed. But I'm not sure. I'm just opening it up as an issue. I don't know how to fix it though.
Yeah. That's a great point. And as we finally put all of these sections together, I agree there are going to be places where there's the points are being brought up more than once. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is going to suggest more lead agencies here. The other issue that will become more obvious as we move through, but many of these issues are national and larger scale types of issues rather than purely Illinois. So federal partnerships is going to be an important component of these as well. And so I'm glad that came up with the erosion section because that was an issue it wasn't clear to me how to handle. Okay, so for now, we'll put in some suggestions on lead agency, but also include a federal component and see how that melds with the rest of the chapters. Okay, the second issue, climate data are often difficult to obtain and interpret by decision makers and the public. So the recommendation is, as climate change poses serious challenges to the social and ecological systems, it is critical to provide climate information to stakeholders and communities of the state to meet the climate adaptive management needs. So the development of web-based climate toolkits are needed to increase the accessibility and usability of climate information. So the first point is collecting the data. The second point is making it available in a usable format, usable ways.
Dave, this is Wes, and this is just a really small thing, but in the recommendation column, does it seem that the first sentence is kind of restating what's in the issue column, and it's not really part of the recommendation? Just thoughts on that?
That's a good, yeah, that's a good point. And part of it is I wanted to give a little more context for the issue. Although you're right, the first sentences in all of these were meant to give a little more concrete examples of why the issue is relevant to Illinois and to these topics. I certainly can meld those first sentences into the issues, though.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we need to get rid of that sentence altogether. I'm just wondering if it could be moved over into that first column a little bit, as it seems more of an issues than it is a recommendation.
Okay. Yep. Yep. I will. Just making a note here. Thank you. Great. Okay. Third issue would be numerical climate models have inadequate detail to simulate local impacts. This is where we start getting into larger scale needs for funding. Physical and financial support is needed to increase the availability of climate data, particularly of future climate outlooks, at size and timescales small enough to inform local mitigation efforts. Okay.
Dave, how is that different than the first one? I mean, again, it's a measurable, what is the third recommendation different, or how is it different?
That's a great point. The first point is that we need to be able to detect what's happening and look at the history of what's been happening. So so the first point is observations. Okay, this is how many severe flooding events we've got. So we've got the monitoring stations to see them. The third point is looking out to the future, and it's using since we can't take observations in the future. You know, how are the models able to project what is likely to occur? And we need financial support to be able to do that at scales that are relevant to individual communities. Should that be made more clear?
You made it clear to me. I'm thinking when you phrase this to increase availability of climate data, instead of saying particularly, but just of future, that might help. Thanks.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. That's a great point. I'll put in future here to remind myself, but I'll meld that in. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, the fourth point, interacting multiple concurrent impacts of climate changes complicate communication of climate change to the public. sorry, it went to the next page on me. I'm going to start that again. Interacting multiple concurrent impacts of climate changes complicate communication of climate change hazards to the user community. And the recommendation to address that is increased online analyses and tools should be developed to provide guidance on societal needs that are affected by multiple concurrent climate characteristics, such as wind speed, solar radiation, and so forth. So this is intended to be more focused on not just the physics of climate change, but how it affects people, how it affects society, such as wind chills, for example, which is something that we're very familiar with right at this moment. Urban heat islands, issues related to those.
Dave, is there a specific audience that would benefit from that? For example, public works directors, community leaders. I'm wondering if we could kind of target for the benefit of, community leaders or public works directors or something, that these tools need to be developed to make it more specific to, I guess it adds emphasis to why we would want to promote that.
That's a great point. So, if you're talking to, Department of Transportation, that would be more of the physical needs that would be important to climate change, to a public health official or someone planning for heat emergencies. That would be another type of specific need. So yeah, I'd be happy to add some of those, probably in place of user community. Okay. Any other suggestions on that one? Okay, so the fifth point, urban areas and their surrounding communities are especially vulnerable to changing storm frequencies and intensities, potentially decreasing flood mitigation effectiveness. And the recommendation there, again, the first sentence is a bit repetitive, so I'm going to jump to the recommendation is to provide high resolution information in public-oriented publications, presentations, online information sources on anticipated changes in storm intensity and frequency, particularly in urban areas where both the storm frequency and flooding impacts are expected to be augmented. So this is targeted information to specific groups. This is particularly critical in communities with combined storm sewer drainage systems. And additional research is needed in coming years on climate change impacts on storms, especially over urban areas and their fringes, as well as variations in climate within the urban areas. And I'll take a moment to point out here that we have the recommendation is really in two parts. One is something we should do right now, which can be done with funding, can be done very rapidly, and that is providing more public-oriented information. But so that's a short-term recommendation. The longer-term recommendation is where additional research is needed. And you'll see that in several of these points as we move forward.
Hey, Dave, just a furthering question. I don't think it needs to be put in the report, but just out of curiosity, when you say further public information that's easier for them to understand, are we talking about maybe a GIS map or something? That way they can get local information about changes in climate and how it may impact them. I guess, what is there a format you were thinking of on how to implement this?
Well, and that's certainly part of it. We do have some great information out there on specific topics and past observations with the state climatologists and the climate centers in the area. This would be both providing outlooks for the future, as well as offering further interpretation. How do we communicate that climate isn't always only going to affect precipitation, such as leading to river floods, for example, but how will it affect ice formation on rivers, which would cause more blocking of rivers and local intense flooding. So it's part of it would be more GIS based information, but part of it would have to be maybe pamphlets or online information on the multiple types of impacts that we may see.
Great, thanks, Dave.
Okay. Yes. So the 6th point, agricultural practices affect regional climate in uncertain ways. So additional research, publications, these are public-oriented publications, and online tools are needed to improve models of how various agricultural practices, such as cultivation strategies, timing of application of chemicals, and so forth, how they affect crop evolution and regional changes in climate. So this is different from the standpoint of not how climate is likely to affect agriculture. It's the other aspect of how do agricultural practices actually change the local climate. So that's what we're trying to emphasize there.
Who do you propose spearhead that research? Are we recommending that Department of Ag promote and coordinate and collaborate that research, or are we recommending PRI do this on behalf of several entities?
Yeah, I'd actually say that would be important. You need to have Department of Ag would help us better put this information out there and help make sure it's relevant to the audience. But also we need the research side, which is continuing to evolve and as we learn more about climate. So would PRI, it's not really an agency though. Would this be IDNR maybe?
I knew I shouldn't have asked that question.
Now you know why I didn't fill out that column. No,
I think as it relates to Ag, it might be good to collaborate with Department of Ag on that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Since we're focusing specifically on agencies within the state, I think that's a very good one. So thanks. Okay, the remaining sections are related to the types of climate. There was, as we were discussing this, we found that there was a lot of confusion about the types of climate changes that are important. Long-term climate change may have greater impacts on infrastructure, long facilities that are respond to longer term changes, where short duration climate is more on 2 to 3 day intense snowstorms or rainstorms. So we break up the discussion by short duration climate and seasonal climate. And that's how the rest of our points are broken up. So for the first short duration climate, precipitation climate, particularly extremes during hour to weekly time frames, continues to change rapidly, challenging mitigation efforts. Bulletin 75, which provides information on the frequency of climatically extreme precipitation events for structural planning, needs to be updated as often as possible, at least at 10-year time intervals. Okay. And our second, short duration climate, future changes in the frequencies and intensities of hour to weekly time frames, precipitation extremes are likely to accelerate. So I made a little error there. So future changes in frequencies, intensities of hour to weekly timescale precipitation extremes are likely to accelerate. And our recommendation, support is needed in the development of analyses of projected future precipitation extreme events, similar to Bulletin 75, for future time periods, such as 25 and 50 years into the future. As climate science rapidly increases, it'd be necessary to update such a publication every 5 to 10 years. So the main difference between 7 and 8, 7 is more on the current climate, current and recent past. 8 is on what's expected in the future, based on the best models available at the time.
Dave, as I mentioned earlier, I'm in the flood damage mitigation, and we have the same recommendation as number 8, and that's fine. Like you said, it's okay to put more than one, but I'm just letting you know when I see something so that you and I know that we can phrase it the same way. I don't think I had update every 5 to 10 years, so I might go ahead and add that. So thank you.
So I think that's I think it's important, and why don't we email back and forth offline to make sure we're not disagreeing with each other at the very least, and not being overly repetitive. So
hey Dave, this is Wes. I might just make the recommendations. You have 5 to 10 years on here. I assume that this is probably a multi-year study to get numbers on this. I'm not sure. I think that's kind of how long Bulletin 75 took. So I just hesitate to say that we would publish it every 5 years. That seems like a 2 years on, 2 years off. So if we look at what we did from Bulletin 70 to 75, I think that was almost 40 years. So we may be saying that we're in pretty good condition if we're updating that every 10. I posed that to the group though, but I think 5 would be great, but it may be over optimistic. I don't know. I'd throw that out as a question to the group.
I agree. I think we'll get pushback from the engineering community, if nobody else, of saying, well, hey, I'm trying to design this project and I can't hardly get it designed and you're already changing my rainfall. And I can appreciate, Dave, as you were saying, things are changing rapidly, but sometimes even, project designs take a few years. And so if we're updating so rapidly, it's, I think we'll get pushback anyway on, that by the time I start my project, if I start a project one way and by the time I've ended it, you've potentially changed my criteria. So I guess I support the 10-year time period.
I think that's a great point. I mean, these analyses, to some extent, are being done already very frequently, but they're not necessarily oriented towards Illinois. So it could be done every 5 years, I believe, but practically, though, it would not be useful. I agree with you completely that you know, removing 5 is a good idea here. I was just so excited about it. Scientifically, 5 is justifiable, but I think practically that would probably be way too often. Is 10 years? I mean, that's also a stress, you know, with regard to changing what the outlook is, but that's really where the science is, that, you know, our understanding is changing rapidly at this point, since there's so much research in it.
Yeah, Dave, I think if we do a couple updates and find out that it's changing drastically or not changing much, we could always kind of do a course correction. But I think 10 years for both number 7 and 8,
Okay.
you know, I assume that maybe those are offset each other, or if we would do them both at the same time. I'm not sure how that would best work out, but I think that's something that we definitely want to see happen. But anything, I think 10 years would be a good starting point.
Okay, no, that's great. Okay. Anything else on the short-term types of events? Okay, then we have a couple of points, 3 points on seasonal climate. So number 9 is large uncertainty remains on season total precipitation projections and the likely socioeconomic impacts. And so research is needed to understand the effects of non-stationarity on projected seasonal precipitation and impacts, especially during the spring and summer. Observed increases in spring and summer precipitation in source regions for large rivers in and near Illinois in recent years has led to increased risk of long duration river flooding. So that's an example. So I assume the second sentence really should go into the issue category. Is that? Forget who recommended that before, but I do think this is more of an issue, so I'll meld that into the left. But
Yeah, Dave, I'd assume that quiet is agreement.
okay.
I guess just a question, would that be something that could be included in bulletin 75? Like the results, or?
It could be the way that I'm not sure if maybe Trent or someone else could comment on this, but bulletin 75 and the revised bulletin 75 really are not focused on total growing season precipitation, for example, or you know, winter precipitation changes. It's more on the short term, you know, very high extremes. But does anyone else in our group have comments on that?
Yeah, this is
Trent. Lauren, I thought, oh, go ahead, Trent.
No, it's okay, Wes, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I thought Bulletin 70, the one was published back in the 80s, had, you know, spring, fall, summer, winter information in it. It just wasn't included in 75, but I'm trying to go off memory.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Bulletin 70 had some seasonality to it, but it was just the seasonal sort of when these sort of sub 10-day extreme rainfall events happen, and how frequent they are in winter versus spring versus summer and fall. I would have to dig more into it with Dave's original question about, but I mean, I think that the same sort of methods tweaked a little bit could be used to estimate return intervals of 1 or 3 month, precipitation totals, if that's what was, requested.
and in fact, we could recommend here that this be incorporated as an aspect of Bulletin 75. I don't believe that's as I recall, the old Bulletin 70 did have seasonal climate, but not nearly the amount of detail that we can do now, at least. So so maybe that's a better way of making this not too redundant, is to say this could be or should be added as part of Bulletin 75. So what do you think of that?
I like it.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the input on that. And number 10 on second point on seasonal climate, Illinois may be partially impacted by climatic increases in flash droughts. Climate trends and models suggest the increased probability of flash droughts, particularly in summer months. Online information on the potential for and the impacts of flash droughts is needed. In the longer term, more frequent observations and numerical model investigations are needed on the initiation and evolution of flash droughts and future hazard risk of flash drought in Illinois, especially focused on areas of greatest sector impacts. So that's another example where we have a short-term recommendation and a longer-term research recommendation.
On this one, I might ask you to consider whether this recommendation should be focused on, pushing for basically flash drought information / response to be included in, say, the county hazard mitigation planning documents, right? I mean, giving it kind of a destination or a purpose so that the local kind of disaster response officials are the ones that may particularly need to know or have the benefit of this information. What does the group think of that?
I'm inclined to agree. We have other experts in flash drought here, but what's
Yeah, this is Trent. I think that's a great idea, especially because the information that we kind of guide towards for, let's say, traditional longer-term drought may be a little bit different than what folks need for planning and response to flash drought. So I agree.
well, and at the community level, I didn't recall. I think Lauren, you made that comment, right? I don't recall if you said county planning documents or community, but oh, good.
Generally, it's like a county hazard mitigation plan that they have to develop. They have to develop that particularly for FEMA to remain in like the National Flood Insurance Program. So these are regularly updated kind of, at least conceptually, regularly updated kind of documents. And so I think I like the idea of our plan recommending that this kinds of flash drought information be developed for inclusion in those more localized plans.
I think that's great. I'm not sure there would be much of a climate difference in flash droughts at the county level, but the impacts would be very specific to counties, depending on what kind of communities are, is it an urban county, is it a rural county, and so forth. So I think that's great. I'll add that. Okay. And our last, if there are no other comments on that, our last recommendation and this is on seasonal climate, changes in the frequency and intensity of rapid melt events can cause unanticipated local and wider area flooding events. So this might be an area where I should talk more with the flooding group. Research is needed to understand how periods of greater temperatures during the winter and spring seasons will change with a changing climate in Illinois. A better understanding is needed on how melting ice on Illinois rivers and melting moist soil layers will impact local flooding impacts. Support is needed for this research, resulting in public-oriented information and online tools targeted to those at risk of local floods. Okay. So that's our last recommendations. Last recommendation. So are there any other specific or overall comments that we should consider? Okay. Well, I will say for us, for my group and specifically for me, your comments are extremely helpful. So thank you.
Dave, thank you. I just want to make sure there's no other final comments on the climate change section.
Well, this is Lauren. I'm just trying to think, as I look back at my own section, or or I'm recommending kind of more of the local assistance or establishing kind of that more one-on-one kind of relationships with communities regarding many of these issues, that how some of the information that you're we're recommending it within this section be developed, that with that feeds into kind of the outgoing or the outreach efforts that we're promoting in other sections of the plan, to put this information into the hands of particularly local officials or even regional kind of officials that are having to make government kind of decisions, with the needing to understand the impacts of climate change. So I'm not quite sure how to incorporate that into a recommendation at this point. I'm just kind of thinking out loud how that ties into some of the other recommendations happening within the plan.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Are you recommending us making a specific additional recommendation regarding that?
Yes, but I don't know what that is yet, so I'm not prepared to
Yep.
go that way.
Okay, any other final thoughts or comments on climate change section? All right, David, looks like you're free. Thank you so much for both you and Michael, and sharing your topics today. And that honestly concludes all of our topic reviews at this time. So Tara's pulling up the agenda I see, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with going over the schedule so that we can kind of get everyone's thoughts and feedback on that. So Tara, I'm going to take over here for a moment, and you all should be seeing the current State Water Plan Task Force website, which has our, if you start at the top, come down, we always try and keep this schedule up to date. So at this point, you know, we have sitting at the end of January, and I guess I wanted to reach out to everybody and get their thoughts and feedback on having their sections completed by middle of February, which is only a couple of weeks away. So do we think this is feasible? Does this sound good? I'll pause a moment to get feedback from you all to see if we want to keep that February 15th or possibly if we need to push back the schedule. Any thoughts?
Well, this is Laura. I think we need to push it back, just, you know, seeing that, you know, we need to work with Michael on erosion sedimentation and you know, pulling together those collaborations and things like that. I think just on that one, we'd need more time too. So I'll let Michael speak to that, but that's what I think.
Thank you, Laura. I would appreciate it. If not, I'll you know, I'll push forward. I'll do the will of the group.
Yeah, I thought some of us might be ready. I know I gave my presentation in September, so I understood that the ones that did theirs recently might need a little bit more time. But I feel like sometimes maybe the rest of us should go ahead and plan to move forward if possible. But you know, again, body of the group.
Again, I don't think anything hinders anybody from sending it to me early. It's just when do we want to set a deadline? And I understand, especially for some of the sections that received comments today or may have recently presented or had other conflicts. I guess I would just be open to hear a recommended date on when we think we should set that timeline.
But Wes, you said the initial deadline was mid-February. Can we just do mid-March?
We could. Anybody else have any thoughts about moving that back to mid-March?
Yeah, this is Lauren. I'm okay with that.
For the climate issues, I really do think that February 15th is too close. I'd be okay with. I think 15 March is very reasonable for us.
Is anybody opposed? I doubt it, but is anybody opposed to moving it from mid-February to mid-March? Just so you know, our current schedule's tracking publishing and in the summer, you know, maybe July, sometime in there. That would push our total schedule back a month, I anticipate. So just want to make sure that everybody's in favor, or if there's anybody opposed. Okay, hearing none, we will move the section completion, I guess we'll call it a final draft, for March 15th. So then I guess the next question I have for the group is, when would we want to hold our next meeting? Right now, the intention was to probably hold it after all the sections came in, and at that meeting we would likely go over some of the other sections in the report, such as the introduction portions and such. Do we want to still hold it in late February, early March, or allow that time to be focused on finishing up these sections and holding the meeting in late March? Any thoughts or comments?
To an extent, it might be, I have mixed feelings. It depends a little bit about how the final chapters are sent to everyone and made available to everyone. But when you're combining the report, I think there has to be time to consider it all at the same time. So I guess I wouldn't make it too close to March 15th.
Well, and just to clarify, what we'd be talking would be kind of independent of these critical issues of the 13 topics. This would be more of the supporting information. I guess there could be a question if we do a overview of the 13, making sure they all are consistent. I don't know if we would cover that in our next meeting or if we would wait. You know, as you kind of see in the current deadline, we have the combined report kind of after we do the intro and conclusions here. And that would kind of be the final step before we do the final outreach. So again, I don't know if we have to have the sections for that introduction overview portion, but throw it up to the group for their thoughts on that.
I guess I throw out that this Monday morning time frame seems to work pretty decent. If we looked at maybe the 21st, 28th of March.
What does everybody think? 21st, 28th of March, sound good?
Yeah, 28th works better for me, but if the group needs 21st, I can rearrange.
Works for me. Either way.
And Lauren, do you want me to send out a poll for those full 2 weeks to see which day is better for those 2 weeks, or just send out those 2 Mondays and see which Monday works better?
Yeah, let's see which Monday works better. I think the 28th probably works better for me too, but
Hey, Wes, this is BJ. I know that some of the schools have spring break. I'm trying to figure out, I know I'm going to be gone a week in there, but anyway, that might be something to consider. I don't know how many people.
I think the 21st is a holiday, isn't it?
I don't think so. I don't think we have any holidays in March.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking February for a pre-meeting. Sorry.
We are talking March, correct? I believe that's what you stated, Lauren.
that is correct, March.
Yeah, I know I'm staring at my schedule, and the 21st is when our school district is on spring break, but I can't speak to everyone's.
Yeah, I know that's, my wife teaches at Rochester, and that's when hers is, and I know we're going to head out of town, but whatever's convenient for the rest of the group, certainly fine with me.
Sarah, do you know when Springfield is?
Yeah, the 21st. So starting of 21st.
Yeah, Chatham's is the 21st, Rochester, Springfield, all the 21st. So it sounds like there's a bit of consensus of that going on. Maybe do we just propose to the 28th, Lauren? Or
I think so.
I guess I can. Okay. So does the 9 o'clock on 9 a.m. on the 28th sound good for everybody? Does this time work for everyone? Freshly revived right off the weekend?
Sounds good.
Fine with me.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I will coordinate with Tara and we will kind of update this schedule, and we'll look at having our next meeting the 28th of March with sections due on the 15th of March. And in the March meeting, we'll be kind of covering the topics kind of in the first half of the report. Tara, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I just know that Wes and I were trying to get our sections ready to hand out as maybe a template. We've already sent out the template for the table, but just to sort of show how we're writing the intro. I noticed some sections did write issues and recommendations as more of narrative, and then reiterated it in their table. But as a group, we had decided we were using the table to present those recommendations. So I think in the next week or so, Wes and I will have our sections ready to send out as samples, also showing some figures that are in there, just to sort of show how we're approaching each section, if that helps people. And that'll give you enough time by the mid-March to go ahead and try and revise your section to match that general protocol.
Thanks, Sarah. I guess I'll throw it out to the group as well. We have some supporting documentation that we want to write up, the supporting information, both kind of on the introduction and kind of the concluding sections of the report. Would anyone be willing to volunteer or assist in developing any of that material? I'll ask the question, at least. I guess if I stay quiet long enough, no, I'm kidding. All right. Well, just to share, let me see if you guys are seeing this document. Are you guys seeing the table of contents on your screen?
Yes.
Okay. So essentially, this is some of the stuff that Lauren, Tara, and I have discussed about preparing. And this would be what we'd likely cover in this next State Water Plan Task Force is this information. Again, we can send out this table of contents or these topics to see if anybody thinks we need to add anything. I think we briefly touched on this at the last task force meeting. But again, this was kind of some of the introductory information that goes along with the report. So if you would like to assist in any of this, you can feel free to reach out to Tara, Lauren, or I on any of this. We'd love to have any help on this, but that would be the topics that we'll be covering at the next State Water Plan Task Force meeting. So with that, does anybody have any questions on this or any comments to these topics or these portions within the introduction? I guess I'm just asking the question if anybody feels like we're leaving anything out that needs to kind of be covered in the first half of the report. We also do have kind of the conclusion where we'll be talking about some of these other issues as well, cross-cutting topics, and some of these other items. So those are would probably be covered in a April task force meeting. But again, late March, the 28th, we'll probably be covering these things. Any questions or comments to that? Okay, hearing none. Trying to think if there's anything else we need to cover. it sounds like we're maybe still kind of looking to publish the report in late summer. It may push into early fall, but I think that's what we're tracking right now, with likely a public outreach effort occurring around May in the late spring. So with that, I think, let me double check my agenda here to make sure we have everything kind of covered. So yeah, I think that has covered anything. Is there any general questions or comments from the task force?
I would just say, moving forward, I think we shift into more now of a collective mindset of how these various topics pull together into a plan. And so we need to kind of think from a plan perspective going forward. Thank you, everybody, for your time today.
Thank you all. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.